here on Sunday. She asked me to give her the study guide from last week. So when I went in to revise it, I didn't delete last week's. Now, you remember last week is when we read all those texts you'd never read before. But I mean, that's interesting. That makes the case for why we did the journey. Because that's the part that is never in the lectionary. There's, except for the woman at the well, I think those were all unknown to you. And they attest to the sort of gathering storm. But before we get ahead of ourselves, start with Barbara Brown Taylor this morning in this book. Excuse me. Truth to tell. We say we want to forget the world, but in the depths of our hearts, we do not want to be forgotten by it. That's a quote Barbara uses from Francois Fenelon. There are many ways to tell the story of what happened on Good Friday. According to John, it involved a collision between religion and politics. While Pilate and the chief priests conspired to solve their mutual problem while managing to remain enemies, Jesus stood at the center of the stage, like a mirror in which all those around him saw themselves clearly for who they were. One way we Christians have to avoid seeing our own reflections in a mirror is to pretend that this is a story about Romans and Jews. As long as they remain the villains, then we're off the hook, or so we think. Unfortunately, this is not a story that happened long ago in a land far away. Sons and daughters of God are killed in every generation. They've been killed in holy wars and inquisitions, concentration camps, and prison cells. They have been killed in Cape Town, Memphis, El Salvador, Alabama, and I would add in the Galilee and in Gaza. The charges against them have run the gamut, but treason and blasphemy have headed the list, just as they did for Jesus. He upset those in charge at the courthouse and the temple. He suggested they were not doing their jobs. He offered himself as a mirror they could see themselves in, and they were so appalled by what they saw that they smashed it. They smashed him in every way they could. One of the many things this story tells us is that Jesus was not brought down by atheism and anarchy. He was brought down by law and order, allied with religion, which is always a deadly mix. Beware those who claim to know the mind of God and who are prepared to use force if necessary to make others conform. Beware those who cannot tell God's will from their own. Temple police are always a bad sign. When chaplains start wearing guns and hanging out at the sheriff's office, watch out. Someone is about to have no king but Caesar. This is a story that can happen anywhere at any time, and we are likely to be as likely to be the perpetrators as the victims. I doubt that many of us will end up playing Caiaphas or Pilate. However, they may have been the ones who gave Jesus the death sentence, but a large part of him had already died before they ever got to him. The part Judas killed off. Then Peter, and then all those who fled. Those are the roles with our names on them, not the enemies, but the friends. Whenever someone famous gets into trouble, that is one of the first things the press focuses on. What do his friends do? Do they support him, or do they tell reporters that unfortunately they had seen trouble coming for some time? One of the worst things a friend can say is what Peter said. We weren't friends exactly. Acquaintances might be a better word. Actually, we just worked together, for the same company. I mean, not together really, but near each other. My desk was near his. I really don't know him at all. No one knows what Judas said. In John's gospel, he does not say a word, but when he stands, he says it all. After he has led some 200 Roman soldiers and the temple police to the secret garden where Jesus is praying, Judas stands with the militia. Even when Jesus comes forward to identify himself, Judas does not budge. He's on the side with the weapons and handcuffs, and he intends to stay there. Or maybe it was not his own safety that motivated him. Maybe he just fell out of love with Jesus. That happens sometimes. One day you think someone is wonderful, and the next day he says or does something that makes you think twice. He reminds you of the difference between the two of you, and you start hating him for that, for the difference, enough to begin thinking of some way to hurt him back. I remember being at a retreat once where the leader asked us to think of someone who represented Christ in our lives. When it came time to share our answers, one woman stood up and said, "I had to think hard about that one. I kept thinking, who is it that told me the truth about myself so clearly that I wanted to kill him for it?" I don't laugh at that. I'm reading this seriously. According to John, Jesus died because he told the truth to everyone he met. He was the truth, a perfect mirror in which people saw themselves in God's own light. What happened then goes on happening now. In the presence of his integrity, our own pretense is exposed. In the presence of his constancy, our cowardice is brought to light. In the presence of his fierce love for God and for us, for our own hardness of heart is revealed. Take him out of the room and all those things become relative. I am not that much worse than you are. You're not. I am not that much worse than you are, not you than I, but leave him in the room and there is no room to hide. He is the light of the world. In his presence, people either fall down to worship him or do everything they can to extinguish his light. A cross and nails are not always necessary. There are 1,000 ways to kill him, some of them as obvious as choosing where you will stand when the showdown between the weak and the strong comes along. Others of them as subtle as keeping your mouth shut when someone asks you if you know him. Today, while he dies, do not turn away. Make yourself look in the mirror. Today, no one gets away without being shamed by his beauty. Today, no one flees without being laid bare by his love. Amen. Amen. Barbara Brown Taylor. Okay, now this messy paper is going to get us through the next moments. All right, so with completing the journey, the heralded child to the condemned prisoner, and we have been sort of putting the trail of breadcrumbs between that celebrated child. And then last week we saw that he got on the wrong side of the people, on the wrong side of the Sadducees and Pharisees, that is the Jewish leadership. He got on the wrong side of Herod, and finally he gets on the wrong side of his disciples. So let's look there on your list, the gathering storm of threat. Let's look at John 18, 15 through 17 and 25 through 27. And if someone read for us. Everybody have a Bible. There's one later that you're not going to put it in. No, it's that. 15 to 17. I got that. Chapter 8. You got that, Karen? I do. All right. Wait for Diane to get her right look, and I need to put you in place. Be very grateful.
John 18, 15. Thank you.
I'll have a little hit of coffee. Are you good, Diane? You got the place? Okay, please, Karen.
Okay. Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest, but Peter was standing outside the gate. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out, spoke to the woman who guarded the gate, and brought Peter in. The woman said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the slaves and the police had made a charcoal fire because.
Now, that's the
Oh, is that
17,
it? I'm sorry.
and then let's drop down to 25, please.
Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. They asked him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Again, Peter denied it. And at that moment, the cock crowed.
Okay, so this is a well-known story to us, right? And that's what Barbara Brown Taylor was referencing here. Well, I worked with it. Well, my desk was near. Well, we didn't work together. I knew. So why is Peter denying here? Is it because he's been persuaded by the Jewish leadership, the Roman leadership, and you know what? It's crazy.
I think he's just afraid,
He doesn't want to get. Well, whatever's happening to him, I do not want it happening to me. No, I don't know. Nope. Don't know him. Okay, then let's look at the other, of course, Judas. And let's look at Matthew 26.
I have it.
Okay, just hang on a second. We'll flip. 26:14.
Of not 42. 26, 42.
No, 14
14 to 16.
14 to 16.
Oh, where am I looking? Oh, I'm on the wrong one. Okay.
We'll get there. We'll come back to you for 46, but right now. you know,
I'll do
fine.
14. That's fine. I have
Good.
14.
Good.
Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I hand him over to you?" So they counted out for him 30 silver coins. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over.
And from then on. And from then on. What will you give me? What about the other 10 or 12 or so folks? What do we know about them? I mean, first of all, we know they're not here.
Right. They're hanging back.
Yeah, well, he had other things to do, you know. Judas, now, there are lots of theories about Judas. There are theories that Judas, somebody told me once in a Bible study, one of the women in my congregation told me with great authority that she knew that Judas was not all bad because he hung himself later. So he I'm just telling you the story. I'm not the author of this.
I read a book by Taylor Caldwell, I, Judas. Has anybody read that?
Oh, yeah, I know of it.
And what her premise for him giving him up was more, yeah, I mean, it's a novel, but that she wanted him to play his hand. You know, Judas wanted Jesus to play his hand and be a leader and, you know, take over and, you know, build the temple in 3 days and all that stuff. That's what he wanted. That was the premise of that book, that he was trying to force Jesus's hand.
Well,
It doesn't say that in the Bible, that's for sure.
yeah, my parishioner told me that, in fact, Judas has gotten a bad rap. Judas was the most believing of all the disciples, and he knew what had to take place and what would take place. So he was hastening God's miracle, which pretty much to me
That's some justification though.
says you can justify anything if you work hard enough. Maybe, you know, it's like when you have kids and you hear a boom upstairs and you go, what's going on up there? What's the answer? Nothing. When you know very well that was the sound of the dresser drawers.
Yep.
All right, so Jesus is now essentially alone. And we need to look at this gathering storm because sometimes we look at it only in power politics terms. Like Herod is in charge and he can do what he wants because they're an occupying force. Or we look at it in sort of religious authority terms, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Or we can look at this as a kind of a popularity contest. Bill Cosby, one of the most beloved characters on the American scene until he wasn't.
Mhm.
And then when he wasn't, one of the most hated persons. So we can look at it that way. But I think a more effective and authentic way to look at it is this was all of those all at once. There were political, I mean, the people, remember we read last week, the people saying, you know, he might be a demon. And if he isn't a demon, he's probably a god. But, you know, who would take that kind of a chance? If I think you might be a demon or maybe a god, I'm probably going to leave you on the curb and go my way. Because even though the promise of God is so great, the likelihood and fearsomeness of the demon is more in my life experience than an encounter with God. So we have this gathering storm, which becomes kind of a perfect storm. It's political, it's religious, it's popular. And remember at the end, when they're to release one person because of the Passover, they cry out, Barabbas, Jesus Barabbas, let him go, let him be the one that is not acquitted here. I mean, that is acquitted here. All right, so we have this storm. Today, our topic is submission, Jesus' submission. And so let's take a look at submissive behaviors here. If you're in Matthew 26, just stay right there. And would somebody be ready to
I will.
read 42? Hang on a second, Jane. Somebody else turn to Molly, maybe you could turn to Luke 22. These are parallel accounts, you know, the synoptic gospels often have things in parallel to one another. So we'll have Jane and then Molly with the Matthew and then Luke in text. Okay, Jane?
Again, he went away for the second time and prayed, my Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, you will be done. Your will be done.
And
Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done.
all right, so we have submission, but not unqualified submission. Right? These two prayers could be, your will be done, period. I'm just saying, if it's all the same to you.
Rather none.
I once heard a pastor say, and I think it's good, that there's no one verse in the Bible. I think he was talking about the Luke text, but these parallel texts. There's not any one verse in the Bible that better demonstrates the human and divine nature of
Mhm.
Jesus than this one. If it's all the same to you, could we skip this? But you know, I'm here to do what you want. Interesting tension, isn't there?
Mhm.
Okay, let's look at 2746. Matthew. I have a cough out my mouth. Okay, somebody got that for us?
Mhm.
Okay.
And about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried with a loud voice.
Oh. No, no, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani.
There's no O here. It's an L-E-N, lemma
But,
sabachthani, that is, my God, why have you forsaken me?
all right, what's going on here? What happened to that divine and human?
Sounds more human, the human side's.
Yep.
Yeah, it
Coming
sounds like
through.
the human side is holding out here. Yes, and one, Karen knows. In Tenebrae services, I always make sure that I'm reading that verse. Because otherwise, first of all, the lights are going down,
Right.
and then you have some poor elder going, "Hey, Karen, God!" And of course, they haven't looked at it till that moment.
Right.
So Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani.
You don't see it, my Bible is E-L-I.
Those are two different ways of, you know how Hanukkah is sometimes with a C
Yeah.
and sometimes with an
Right.
E? Those are two forms of, transliteration,
Okay,
writing Hebrew words with English letters. This is not my field, I'm not a linguist, but, it's two ways to transliterate.
okay.
What do you, does anybody else have Eloi? What do you have?
I have Eloi.
Eloi.
Elijah.
In Matthew, it's in Aramaic though, right? And
Mhm.
so it depends on which gospel you're reading to, I think, perhaps.
Well, that's true, but these are different ways of transliterating, or, all right, Eli, lama sabachthani, but. In any case, it's a mouthful.
Right.
And in the Tenebrae service, as the light gets less and less,
Mhm.
I would have this, when I was new at this, I had an elder who between no light and a lamp. Even Jesus wouldn't have understood what he said. Okay, now, one of the things, we've been using gospels throughout this whole study. But I think in the letter attributed to Paul to the church at Philippi, I think we have a really classic, and I think it formed the theological understanding of Jesus' submission. So let's take a look at that. That's Philippians
Where
2,
is Philippians?
way in the back.
The back.
Um,
After Corinthians, yeah, right after Ephesians.
Right, oh, okay. Got it, thank you. There's too far back.
You were in
How far back
Thessalonians or
is it?
something.
Oh, here it is.
That's in
Okay,
Monday.
where are we? Philippians 2.
After right.
All right.
I'll read that.
Thank you.
Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but making himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross.
All right, I'm gonna read this from this translation, a little bit different. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness, and being found in human form, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. And so that's kind of the classic formulation of the idea of Jesus' submission to God and to God's will, which is in a little tension with, look, if it's all the same to you, could this cup pass?
Right.
Is it really necessary? And the answer is yes. This is really necessary.
Questions?
Absolutely.
Show your statement to show how little I know about the Bible, but following the Matthew phrase, it talks about when he took his last breath, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And then it goes on a little further. And wouldn't all of those people there have been so petrified of what they just did? I mean, this thing at this point, you know.
Let's remember that this is written 50 years, Mark, to 150 years after the event. If I said to you, if we just stopped right now and said, okay, let's all tell what happened to us on 9/11, we would remember different things. One of the things I would remember, I'm the moderator of an Arabic speaking congregation. You know, they need somebody to preach in Arabic, and so they have guest preachers all the time. Usually students who are here doing their PhD or something, are there for 2 years or something. So I'm the moderator. They called me and said, we were sent home from the hospital and we have to come back tomorrow morning with our green cards, our residency. Now that's in my account. You may have some other account. The next morning, Karen was locked down with kids in high school overlooking the Manhattan skyline. She has,
9/11, yeah.
she has her account. And I don't know if she's told her grandchildren, I don't know if I've told my grandchildren, but 150 years later, that might have a different. It might have become, for instance, and at once, especially as we're reading in Mark, at once, the Arab people in Jersey City were required to show their papers. Now, it's not exactly what happened, but it could become that. And there's one really cute thing about this, the rent of the cloth in the temple has led to what we call the strapitis, which is in the Tenebrae service. There's a time where you hear, and it's the strapitis, and that's very interesting in Orthodox practice, because the strapitis is when it all stops and we acknowledge God has died. Isn't that an interesting theological? This is the moment, and for these next days, that we will be godless because he has died. So interesting. All right, other comments, questions? All right, the nature of John's Jesus' submission. Let's look at the Gospel of John. And this is a pretty good one to take some time with. John 6:35. With my scriptus, I ruined my place. for dramatic effect, I lost my place. What did I say? 6 what?
6:35.
Thank you.
For 42.
All right. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. But I say to you that you have seen me and yet do not believe. Everything that the Father gives me will come to me, and anyone who comes to me, I will never drive away. For I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. And this is the will of him who sent me, that I should lose nothing of all that he has given me, but raise it up on the last day. This is indeed the will of my Father, that all who see the Son and believe in him may have eternal life, and I will raise them up on the last day. And of course, this is this promise, this covenant in love is what we commemorate at the Lord's table. Hang on to this. If you can remember nothing else, remember this. If you eat this bread and you drink from this cup, you'll never be thirsty. You'll never hunger. You'll never die. And so this pronouncement in John, or this account in John, is Jesus acknowledging the full picture of why it is necessary. Why the answer to could this cup pass is no. This cup couldn't pass. So I say that, and you piously agree. Yeah, but that's what I mean. What does that mean? and so that's what we want to address. But first of all, let's think about an alternative journey. There's an alternative, right? He could have been, this story could have been heralded as a child, doted upon as a young person, elevated as a young man, and crowned as Messiah in maturity, and died in bed. And what's wrong with that? Wouldn't that be a happier story?
But it wouldn't be a lasting story. Look at all the kings and crowns that have come and gone. And
Well, that's true. You got a point there. You got a point there. Like there was King Tut, and things didn't work out for him.
Wouldn't be the sacrifice for us if that happened. So just dying in bed wouldn't have been.
Well, but maybe the problem, I think, is really a very basic one. Life just isn't like that. We don't get born, have a charmed life. Everything goes our way forever. And then we die happily in bed. And there are some people who think that they have lived that kind of a life. I haven't known many, but I've known a couple who, life has always been grand and it will continue to be grand. I think they're not paying attention.
In their own little world, but they're paying attention to the rest of the world.
Something's wrong, because that's not how it is. So, what is the story, this journey from heralded child to prisoner? And I think I've mentioned this to you before. Let me have one of those things. And the philosophers, now philosophy is different than theology. Philosophers say, what is this story about? What's the meaning of this? And they say it's because this story of crucifixion, 3 days, resurrection, and ascension. Is paradigmatic, is a paradigm for conflict, pause, resolution, my handwriting, I know is atrocious, but I'm doing the best I can. Conflict, pause, resolution, or resurrection and ascension is a paradigm, a large story about a micro story that is your story and my story. That we live in conflict and it never resolves, bang. There's a pause. Did your mother say to you when you were upset about sleep on it? Pause. Have a falling out with a friend and there's a couple of days, weeks, maybe months, maybe years, that you don't relate too well, but then you reconcile. Conflict, pause, resolution, and growth. That's the human paradigm. God made God's self live through that paradigm in enormously exaggerated terms. So that conflict, pause, resolution. Do you get what I'm saying? And then some philosophers say that this is the what do they call it? The meta narrative of life. This is the meta narrative, the big story of everybody's life, all except those few who are not paying attention and think that there's never been a moment of conflict. Others say, no, it is not, it's not just paradigmatic, it's cyclical. We're always going through this every day and in every way, writ small and writ large. We're struggling in the course, the essence of human life is this doing one thing, meeting a barrier or conflict, we could call it. And so the redemptive narrative of Jesus is the one that allows us to make sense of the micro narrative, the meta narrative, micro narrative. I know this is very sort of heavy stuff, but I think it's a helpful, do you find it as a helpful frame? And you know, you make sense of things. And I was talking to somebody very recently, somebody here at church, who was talking about her mother, I think it was mother, and she said something like, well, you know, when she died, I was just so exhausted. I was just, but looking back now, I'm glad I had those. Well, that's exactly my experience with my mother. By the time my mother died, the last 3 weeks were just torturous. She, you know, I had a sister who was struggling to understand what was going on, and I'm explaining it to her like I understand. And you know, why won't mommy talk to us? She can't. But can she hear us? Well, yeah, I think she can. I mean, those are crazy times. That's crazy time. And at first, you're exhausted, maybe even ashamed to say you're relieved, but relieved. You're sad, but you're not entirely sad because this was pretty awful. And then time goes by and you go, that was all right. It was all right. She was dying. We were there. We loved her until she went to wherever she went in her head. She knew we loved her. She knew we were there. It's okay. It's better than okay. This is how it should be. And then conflict, pause, resolution, growth. Even if growth is just, it's okay. It's okay. A friend, a pastor friend asked me to chair a meeting for him last week on a committee I didn't understand at all, but he had an agenda. So I'm capable of going. And the next thing on our agenda is, who can tell us about that? And he just asked me very quickly to do this. And then I saw him at a meeting and I said, Chris, well, may I ask, well, are you all right? Is everything all right? He said, well, it's going to be. And then he told me his former wife, he's divorced, his former wife died last week. And they have 2 children. And so it's a little complicated, but it's still the same paradigm, huh? Narrative. But I like him. I think he's a very good pastor. And he said, when I said, is everything okay? He said, no, but it's going to be. That's faith. That's confidence that our micro narrative echoes the meta narrative. That is God's revelation to us. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. So that's what I have for you. The submission of, yeah, we'll go see if Soup's doing the right things. But well, let me stop there. What thoughts and comments do you have about this? The journey we just took isn't the happy from Christmas to Easter, you know, with just one little sad week there at Holy Week. So what do you think?
I think it gave a better perspective of, it wasn't just like you study Jesus parables and all that piecemeal. And then this gave us kind of a trip that was connected and toward a purpose at the end. I have another question. Scientifically,
Yes.
was there an earthquake that day?
Yeah, it happened just the same way that star arose.
Right.
That's how memory regarded it. Now, I have a very strong memory. It's very strong in my mind, but I don't know if it actually happened. The night of 9/11, it was a very complicated day because I was the president of the school board and we had 2,500 kids and we had to just with them. It was a very complicated. Then I was on an airplane going to Washington. And we took off from LaGuardia and New Yorkers are New Yorkers. We took off from LaGuardia and you go up and you go straight over to New Jersey and then you turn left and you go down to National Airport or Reagan Airport. Well, we took off and then banked so hard I knew for sure I was going to die. And then we hit back down on the tarmac so hard that I actually chipped a tooth. And then we kind of, I mean, everybody, this is a 7:30 shuttle. And so everybody's like, oh, okay, I'm awake. And the pilot comes on and says, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry for that emergency landing. We're going to roll back up to the terminal and check our fuel. And the woman across the aisle to me, she was doing the New York Times crossword puzzle, and there's now a big streak, brother. She said, how the hell much gas could that? Anyway, it was a very unsettled time. And in the night, the general secretary of the National Council of Churches for whom I work said, look, would you go to work, spend what you have to spend, but we're making a prayer resource for the first responders. The American Bible Society wants a copy tomorrow afternoon. So I got busy with that. The next morning, I went down to the bagel shop because I've been up all night writing this Bible book. Went down to the bagel shop, and the bagel shop in Tenafly is a funny place because the owner is Jewish, but he's never ever there. The guy who runs it is the tallest Asian you have ever seen. I think he's Polynesian, actually. So he's like gigantously tall. And then everybody else that works there is Hispanic. So it's like, like the kingdom of God is like this. And I came in and the owner was there. And he said, in what passes for politeness in New York, what's yours? Meaning, it's the British version is, how may I be of service? The Brooklyn Jew is, what's yours? It's a very polite request. And I told him whatever I wanted. Wrap it up with it, coffee. And then he had put a paper bag up on the wall, and it said with a grease pen, it'd written courage. Courage. That's very strong in my memory. I think I know that happened. But now, many years later, 25 years later, or whatever it is, I'm not sure it happened. But something like it happened. I don't know about the earthquake. I don't know about the rent cloth in the temple. I don't know about the people springing from grace, but I know some things happened in that time. That you can't understand how significant it is unless I kind of gild it a little bit so you understand how unusual it is. And I think that explains earthquakes and stars. And look, it's our way of saying, really, Molly, you can't believe how strong. I mean, this guy was saying what had to be said for all of us in that moment in this country. Courage. And he gave me that in my bagel, and it changed how I felt. Well, a bagel story is not all that compelling. I wouldn't be surprised if my children, and my children were gone from me at this time. One was at Oxford for junior year abroad. And he knew that his parents could have been in any of those planes or in any of those buildings. So, he was anxious. The other one was 17 and an EMT. And the governor called up the EMTs to go to Meadowlands. And so he called me and told me he was going to do that. And I told him I couldn't. And he said, Mom, I have to. I love you. And he hung up. This is the first time one of my children flat out defied me. I said that to somebody and they said, you got all the way to 17. And we didn't see that boy till Tuesday. Actually, Wednesday morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, he came home. And they went because they thought there were going to be thousands of wounded. The fact was there were only hundreds of somewhat wounded. So he spent the next 30 or 40 hours walking through the parking lots of the Meadowlands, taking down the license numbers so they could match them to names, so they knew who was never coming home. And so, terrible task. Well, I don't know if I have told that story to, I have told it to Andrew, my older son. And I wouldn't be surprised if he remembered it, something like this. And then my mom encountered a Jewish, I guess he was a rabbi, who said, take courage. And she did. Is that a lie, an embellishment? The natural consequence of oral history? I don't know, but I know this, it preserved the truth. And that's what we have to focus on. It preserved the truth, this people even out of their graves and torn cloths in the temple and such like. Preserve the truth of some human experience in that moment. That's the best I can do. I don't know, Molly, can you do any better? I don't know. That's what I know.
And geology didn't teach you that?
I think that this study has been wonderful because following Jesus' ministry, how he starts out and he's gathering his apostles and they're doing wonderful things and he's gathering all these followers. And then you see how things start turning against him. People are suspicious of him. People think he's a demon. The Jewish leaders are afraid of him. It's just brought together all of the things that came that actually evolved into Holy Week.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Good. Well, that was our hope. that
Yeah.
We would sort of close the gap. I mean, sort of the trajectory of, because the way the lectionary is written, you never read what we read last week, never. And so you go from healing and preaching to suddenly he's in a jackpot. You don't know quite why. But you know, you go along with the school play and you have Holy Week and then you have Easter. And that misses a very essential part of this meta narrative and micro narrative. All right, well, yesterday Ramadan started and so I've made you a Palestinian red lentil soup. It's got a lot of spices in it and you'll be able to taste a lot of the spices, but it's not hot. I didn't use cayenne or harissa, you know, the hot stuff. And I was going to bring cayenne and I just had too many things to bring this morning. So I don't like to put it in the soup because some people don't tolerate heat very well, and I didn't want to do that. So you can kind of imagine that you could put hot sauce in it. James brought some bread. I'm gonna ask that somebody else can, maybe Diane and do it. Well, would some of you help get soup?
Yeah, sure.
Together? I think it's warm now.
It's very hot.
Oh, it's very hot. And there's something in here I want to read to you, but I have to find it and I dropped my bookmark, so bear with me.
So you find it while we get the soup.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, mute yourselves.
Welcome on yourself.
Robin, I saw a picture of you and Anne Henley together.
Yeah,
Was
We-
does she worship there when she's there, or was she there for the Columbia thing?
both things. She was with the people from Columbia and she came to the class that I went to on Friday, which was really for ministers, but and elders. My sister's an elder in her church and she was coming down. So I said, well, I'll go to the thing too. What do I care? But it got really heavy duty at the end. So we kind of booked out of there because it was really well up, you know, miles above our understanding. But I got to talk to her for quite a while. She is just lovely. Then on Sunday, she was at church and I sought her out to say hello and how much, you know, Joe and I really love your ministry at you know, Presbyterian Church, and you know, she just really is like, oh, I'm so glad, you know, Molly, blah 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 blah. She's just great, you know her.
Love her. Yeah, she's wonderful. She could, yes, she is wonderful. So I'm
It
glad
was
you got
so
to meet.
fun. It was so fun meeting her, you know, and hearing about you and stuff. She didn't tell me anything bad, but you know, it was just
Good.
nice. It's just really nice. And it's like my father-in-law, who's long gone, always used
Yeah.
to say mountains and mountains will never meet, but people always will. And it's just so funny, Here I am down in Vero Beach, and
I know.
I went to that class simply because my sister was going
Yeah.
as an elder from her church, and ended up meeting your friend. So
Amazing.
funny. Yeah.
She is a joy and a delight and a really good friend. And I technically I worked for her when I was at the seminary.
Yes.
She
Yes,
was
she
my
said that.
boss. Yeah, and then we became friends through that and after that. So
What's funny about her is like she is just there's something about her that when you meet her, you just want to hug her and be her friend. You know what I
yes.
mean?
Yes, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. So
She's so joyful, she's so welcoming, but also down to earth. It's
yes.
yeah, she's wonderful. Good. I'm glad you got to meet her.
I guess the people from Columbia were there for like, maybe 4 days or something.
Okay.
Trying to build connections with our Presbyterian church. We have a number down here of retired ministers that go there too. Like
Okay.
Sam Rutledge, I don't know if you're familiar with that name, and there's like maybe 4 ministers. It's a huge church though.
Yeah.
I give them a little pittance and to say, my money's going home where they need me.
I heard it's a great church though. There in
It is.
Vero.
Their music program's awesome. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Good.
Karen would do backflips if she heard their choir. I mean, they have probably, I don't know, on any given Sunday, the minimum they have is 25. And
God.
their choir guy got his doctorate last year, and he started a program for the youth, and they're trying to bring in the community, which there's a community that's lacking funds and so forth.
Okay.
Right near where we are, and they're trying to bring those kids in with music programs and so forth. It's really, really nice.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
All right, well, listen, I'll let you guys eat your lunch. I'm gonna sign off.
All right, hey, Robin, glad you were with us. Take
I
care.
am too. I always enjoy your class, Eileen. It's wonderful.
Oh, thank you. When are you coming home, dear?
It depends on a couple of things. Joe went to the vets. He's getting a disability thing because of his hearing from the
Yes,
vets, it looks like. And we have we're waiting for a examination that's gonna come through the mail, like we have to go for an exam. So whenever that's done, we'll come back. So probably April-ish, I don't know.
Well, we'll be glad to see you when you get here.
Yeah. Okay, I'll let you know, Mal, if I'm not gonna make it in time for that thing down at Spring Oak.
Okay. Yep. Just let me know.
Okay, all right. Take care, you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
It's Craig to the golf course. It's a beautiful day. I can't really blame him. It is a nice day. Playing with Todd today. No, this is his group that he plays with.
Smells wonderful. All right, bon appetit. Let's pause for a moment. Say
Then
We're
there's
pretty
napkins
fine.
for that, so.
thanks. And right now, please. All right, let's pray. Good and gracious God, for the gift of life, we give you thanks for the meta and micro narratives of our life. We give you thanks and praise. So be with us now in this table fellowship. Bless this food to our use and us to your continued service. In the name of the risen Christ, we dare to pray it. And all God's people said. Okay, well, you can be frank about it too. Thank you. Okay, I think we've lost our.
Well, if it tastes half as good as it smells,
Yes.
home run. Now, do you blend yours? Because I
mixed it with a emergency.
yeah,
The reason I do that is because I put in a can of diced tomatoes
yeah.
and otherwise there's lumps. It's lovely, it's very good. Good.
Oh, it's very good.
Do we want to
I'm
keep
so tempted to
recording?
be like, this is disgusting.
I think you're channeling John.
Oh, it is delicious.
It's very good.
Well, it's interesting combination of spices that we don't